This video is going to go over the short row method called wrap and turn. And I started a swatch here, and I'm going to knit over just a little bit so that we can get to the point where we want to do one of those wrap and turn short row. So the short rows are used to create shaping on your otherwise rectangular piece of knitting or flat piece of knitting, and sometimes in a shoulder shaping to make a bell shape, and sometimes on the back of a sweater to create a higher neckline in the back, and also in the front of a sweater it can help to create bust shaping. Okay, so I'm going to work a short row right here, 6 stitches in from the end. The first step is to slip the stitch purlwise from the left needle to the right needle. Then you're going to move your working yarn in between the needles to the front of your work. Slip the same stitch back to the left needle, and then move the working yarn in between the 2 needles like so. So that's caused the working yarn to wrap around the base of that stitch that we slipped back and forth. And then the turn part of the wrap and turn short row. Alright, then I'm going to purl back now on this piece to the point where I want to work another wrap and turn. Okay, so here we are, 6 stitches in from the other side of this piece, and my working yarn is in front because I was purling. I'm going to slip 1 stitch from my left needle to my right needle, move my yarn in between the needles, this time to the back, slip the same stitch back to my left hand needle, and then bring the working yarn back to the front. So this is the working yarn wrapped around the base of this stitch that I slipped back and forth, and now we're going to turn. Okay, and because I moved the yarn to the front of my work on the purl side of the stockinette stitch, when I turn, it's on the back side and I'm ready to knit away. So now I'm going to knit across. I'm going to stop short of the last wrap and turn that I did on this front side of my stockinette stitch. I can see it's here. There's 2 ways you can tell it. On the stockinette stitch knit side, you can see the wrap pretty easily. It looks like a purl bump. But also, a telltale is this space in between the wrapped stitch and the unworked stitches is pretty wide open compared to the stitches that are worked together on the other parts of the knitting. So this is the wrapped stitch, and I'm going to stop. This time I'm going to stop 3 stitches before that wrapped stitch. So I'm going to work 1 more. And then there are 3 stitches in the wrapped stitch. So I'm going to wrap this stitch here. So I'm going to slip that, and then I'm going to move my yarn to the front. Then I'm going to slip the stitch back, move my working yarn to the back. That's when I wrapped that stitch. And then I'm going to turn my work so that I can purl back now. I'm going to do the same on the purl side. I'm going to purl back to 3 stitches before the wrapped stitch. on this side. Stretch out these stitches so I can see where it was. Now on the purl side, the purl bump is harder to identify because the rest of these all have purl bumps too. So on this side I will rely on the extra large gap that happens between the stitches. So you can see it's right here. And this is the wrapped stitch. I'm going to stop 3 stitches before, so 1 more to go. You can probably also see it pretty easily on this side. Yeah, if you aren't sure, you can see that this stitch here, the one that's before the gap, has the wrap around it. And so on this side it looks more like a purl. But the gap is usually pretty apparent. I would use that way. Alright, so then I'm going to slip this stitch to the right needle, move my yarn to the back, slip that stitch back to the left needle, and move my yarn, my working yarn, back to the front of this side. Then turn around. Alright, now what I'm going to do is begin to resolve those wrap and turns. And the first wrap and turn is going to be right here. So there's the first gap, and here's the second gap. So that's the first wrap and turn that I'm going to resolve. So I come up right up to it, and when working this one, you insert the needle into the wrap first, and then into the stitch as though you were going to knit it regularly. Wrap your yarn and pull through both of those parts. So both the stitch that's on your needle and the wrap that was at the base of the needle. You pull it through and knit it off. There you go. And then you can knit to the next one. Here it is right before the next big gap. Slide my tip underneath the wrap and then underneath the stitch, and then through both of those. It's almost like knitting 2 together. And then I'm going to go to the end to turn. Okay. Then I'm going to turn my work around and purl back to the 2 wrap and turns that are on the other end of my piece. So what happens with the wrap is that when you work it together with the stitch that's on your needle or the stitch that it's wrapped around, the wrap part will kind of tuck itself behind the actual stitch on your needle, and it's kind of like when you knit 2 together and the one of the stitches sort of hides behind the other stitch of your fabric. Alright, so here is the first wrap and turn that I'm encountering on the purl side, right here on the side of the gap. And what you're going to do is, you can see at the base of it is this yarn that's wrapped around it. And I'm going to pick that up from the back and bring it up onto my needle, like so. And then I'm going to purl those 2 together, like this. And then I'm going to purl to the next stitch right before the gap, find this part that's wrapping around the base of that stitch, bring it up onto my needle, and then purl these 2 together, and then purl to the end. Okay, so now if you look at these, all right, so if you look here, you can see the 6th stitch from the edge is one that we work to wrap and turn on. And I'm going to use this needle to show you, lift it up a little bit. So here's the stitch that was on our needle, and then the wrap and turn is tucked here behind it. You can see it right here. And then 3 stitches later, here's another one. Here's our stitch that was on the needle, this one here. And then if I lift this off, you can see behind it is the wrap. And then on this side, it will be, let's see, 2, 4, 6 here. It's down here a little bit. So here's the stitch that was on our needle, and the wrap took its place back here behind the stitch. And the other one is a little bit higher up, right here. This is the stitch, and then behind it is the wrap that fell to the back. So once this is got a little more fabric up here, and there's less tension from my needle, you will be able to see how smooth that can look. Let me knit a row across. It might be easier to tell. So this sample showed the short rows starting on the outside, or the outside further to the edges of the knitting, and that's one way that the shaping can happen. And then if you go in the reverse direction next, starting the short rows closer to the center of the work and moving them toward the outside gradually, that will cause the little hill to form, or the cup to form, making the knitting take a 3rd dimension. All right, let's see if this will help to show the fabric. Yeah, you can see it a little bit better, I guess. It's hard to see from the top, but you can see, well, actually you can see because it causes a shadow then. But if I turn this sideways, instead of my knitting being flat from this angle, you can see there's a little hump or a hill right there. So that's the effect of the short row. And if I was to bind this off now, my piece would look like this. The hump would then push itself here and then come back down again. I'll knit another row and then bind it off and come back and show you what that looks like. All right, here's the swatch with the wrap and turn short rows. And I gave it a little steam off of the needles so you could see the shape that happens here. And just so you know, you can kind of tell on this side, this spot right there and this spot right there was where those wrap and turns were, and this are where the wrap and turns were on this side. So I think with a little bit of, just gentle blocking and a little stretching, and maybe even manipulating some of these stitches to kind of distribute the yarn a little bit more. Yeah, even that little bit made a difference in that gap. Let's see if I can do it with this one too. Just tugging the next door stitch, just the slightest bit, closes up any of the little gaps or stretches. And the more that you do the short rows in this way, you'll learn how to kind of tug on your yarn just a little bit to cause the wraps to relax a touch. So that is the wrap and turn short row method. Thanks for watching.